I'm very pleased to be here this morning with Major Roy Pitchford, MFC. Roy was in the Rhodesia Regiment, and he has a very interesting story to tell about his time in the Rhodesian Army. And so, Roy, without further ado, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you went to school and how you ended up in the Army and ended up becoming a commissioned officer in the Rhodesia Regiment.
Sure, John. I was a boarder at Gifford High School in Bulawayo. My parents were on the Zambian Copper Belt, and I went to Gifford from 63 to 69 as a boarder. Upon leaving Gifford, I attempted to study in South Africa in accountancy, and didn't really fit into South Africa, Johannesburg, where I had been born. And so I decided to go back to Bulawayo, where I'd been at school, and I signed up with Deloitte to do a CA. And after immigrating to Rhodesia officially, after a period of time, you get that little brown envelope saying, "Oi, we notice you haven't registered for national service," and then a list of fines and punishments and what have you. So I registered for national service, which eventually came along, intake 127, presented oneself at Brady Barracks. But before enlisting, I'd made a commitment to myself that if you're going to do national service, you can't avoid it. Try and enjoy it. You can't beat the system. Just knuckle down and make the most of it. And having realized that there was an opportunity during national service to do the OSBI, the Officer Selection Board, and to actually go to Gwelo, to the School of Infantry and do the National Service Officer Cadet course. So that was the first 4 days at Brady Barracks. One really applied one's mind and effort to it, and was fortunate enough to be one of the 15 guys selected. And off we went to the School of Infantry in Gwelo. And it was quite a shock, because 4 days at Brady Barracks with the canteen and all the slop and the grub, just horrendous. You fetch up at School of Infantry for your first meal, and your course sergeant marches you into the officer cadets mess, and there's tablecloth with cutlery, crockery, waiters, a menu. I mean, the culture shock was huge, and we realized that we were in for a tough time. It might have the trappings, but by crumbs, this was going to be a course and a half. And we had Major Butch Duncan as our course officer, RAR guy, and Sergeant, the late Sergeant Yanni Nell, as our course sergeant. In my mind, two fantastic officers in the Rhodesian regulars. And between Captain Duncan and Sergeant Nell, we had a really thorough training as officer cadets. 5 of us got commissioned, 2 fell by the wayside, 5 got commissioned, and the other 8 guys were between sergeants and corporals. And of the 5 got commissioned, 1 guy went to artillery, 1 guy went to RAR, and 3 of us went off to 2 independent company. And can
you mention names or not?
Yes, Dave Rankin, Richard Wolf Dampry, and myself went to 2 independent company. James Hepburn, who was actually a Botswana guy who just volunteered. He was sent to the RAR, where he did very well, and was sent to artillery.
Sorry, I missed that. Who was the last guy?
Dudley Murray.
Okay.
And he was posted to artillery, which he didn't really enjoy. And eventually I bumped into him in the Northeast, and he had transferred into the intelligence corps, and he was much happier there.
Yeah.
Anyway, we finished national service. and I went back to Bulawayo and returned to Deloitte to continue my articles and training. And
you failed to mention the fact that you won was it the President's Shield in your
Commandant's Shield.
Commandant's Shield, sorry.
Yeah, the regulars got a Sword of Honor. Us civilian part-timers, we just got a shield. We didn't get a sword. So yes, I was fortunate to get that. Back at 2RR, you know, I didn't do anything. I didn't report. I just waited. And eventually I got a phone call one Thursday morning from the adjutant as to say that, you know, why the heck hadn't I reported to 2RR? Because you had a weekly parade and you had to go down every week Thursday. I said, well, nobody contacted me to do so. So I explained the error of my ways and suggested that I better get down that Thursday evening PDQ. Only problem was I'd been out the military for quite a while, and being a chartered, an article clerk, one had somewhat longer hair than was permitted. I didn't have an opportunity to go and get a haircut. So I fetched up a 2RR in uniform, though I had to dig out from national service, and presented myself to the adjutant. And he accepted my excuse about the haircut. That evening he said, but it will never, ever happen again, will it, Pitchford? And it didn't. And so I joined 2RR D Company. We did call-ups in the Northeast as a platoon commander. Yeah, quite amateurish when I think back, you know, how we ended the war. But at that point, you know, we were still a little bit green about the airs. And I remember the first contact and the first tours that were accounted for. It was such a momentous thing in the battalion that we'd actually seen action, and you know, something had happened. You know, later on it became just by the way, but at that point it was quite something. Anyway, I must confess I didn't really enjoy the infantry side so much, but what could you do? That was your lot. After 2 call-ups, the training major called me in and said, Pitchford, he said, you're going back to the School of Infantry to do a mortar instructor's course.
Sure.
Well, that's quite nice, because the last time I was at the School of Infantry, I was the lowest form of life as an officer cadet, because they only gave you your commission once you left the School of Infantry, so you couldn't lord it over any of the instructors or whatever. So I left School of Infantry as an officer cadet, but I came back as a lieutenant. Now, it was a really nice experience to go into the officers' mess, which we had all revered as holy ground when we were there, and be part of the School of Infantry and to do this this course, mortar instructor course. Most of the course attendees were regulars. We had SAS and RLI guys, and corporals and lance corporals and what have you. But it was a wonderful experience to listen to these regulars and what they and the ops that they were doing compared to us territorial. They were the most incredible soldiers, and what they were doing. You know, one doesn't want to say too much now, even. But when I finished the course, I went back to 2RR and got put in charge of the 2RR Mortar Platoon. And as I was saying, the mortars in those days, most infantry units never unpacked their mortars. They were all just in the armory, and nobody used them because everybody was an infantry soldier. But I took the opportunity to get the mortar platoon together, and we went through the training process, and as proficient as we could become with training with not live ammunition, but just training in the barracks and the map reading, the plotting boards, and we got up to speed on that. And we wondered when we would ever actually get to use these things. And then 2RR realized that the mortar platoon guys weren't doing regular call-ups because, you know, we were mortar platoon and it was the infantry companies that were going in. So I got hauled in by the training major and said, listen, Pitchford, we're forming a new company. E Company. It's a new company in Tuaron. We're a little bit short of soldiers and we're short of officers. So the Mortar Platoon is going to form one of the platoons of E Company. And one resisted it. You know, we mortarmen, we're not infantrymen, blah, blah. And of course, the training major wasn't having any of that. You see, I'll tell you what, Pitchford, as compensation, instead of you going up as a platoon commander, I'm going to let you go up as 2RC of E Company, even though you're just a lieutenant. You can be the 2RC. So off we went. And as 2RC of the company, I had to go ahead of the company and present myself at the Jocket in the northeast, and report into the Colonel, RAR Colonel. RAR were manning the Jocket at the time, and you know, tell him all about E Company strength and whatever. And I mentioned that one of the platoons was the Tuaron Mortar Platoon, and I was the Mortar Platoon commander. And somewhat jokingly, the colonel said to me, "Do you know how to use those things?" I said, yeah, we've brought them with us. Yeah, we're experts, which was a complete fabrication of the truth. And he put it on the board, you know, Tuaron Mortar Platoon with E Company, mortars. He said, "We might have need of you sometime, Pitchford. I'll let you know." Anyway, we were well into the call-up and running around, being chased by tours, chasing tours, and just generally trying to keep law and order in the northeast. And I got summoned back to the Jock, and I was told that there was going to be a high density operation, that several RLI, RAR, other territorial units were going to surround this suspected terrorist base quietly at night, and then we were going to fire a shoot into the target area, flush the tours out, and then they'd run out into these stop groups. And he said, and the good news is that the RAR platoon, Mortar Platoon, is joining you because their OC is on R&R. And so you're not only going to have the Tuaron Mortar Platoon to work with, you're going to have the RAR Mortar Platoon to work with as well. Hey, now that wasn't part of the deal, in my opinion. You know, these are regular, proficient, highly skilled soldiers, and we're a bunch of territorials. And I remember the RAR Mortar Platoon fetching up at the E Company base camp, and typical RAR, absolutely immaculately turned out. Sergeant Major fetched up, presented himself, Ishe, RAR Mortar Platoon reporting for duty and waiting your instructions. Go and park yourselves under that tent over the tree over there. So they sorted themselves out, and they came over and they said, "Permission to start rehearsal and drills and that for the operation tonight." So that's not a bad idea. So we stood and we watched these RAR guys going through their mortar drills. Jesus, they were doing stuff we'd never even seen. We had no idea. We were absolutely in awe of them, and just fantastic soldiers. Anyway, that night, vehicles quietly, we snuck into the position outside of the cordon. We set up the two mortar lines quietly. And then I realized that the RAR had the new South African long-barreled 81mm mortars, and we still had the old 81mm mortars. So we couldn't work together. We had to work independently. Different plotting boards, different ammunition, and all the rest of it. So inevitably, it became a competition. RAR Mortar Platoon versus Tuaron Mortar Platoon to see who can get through the fire mission the quickest.
Yeah.
And we managed to get through the fire mission quicker because whilst we didn't know all the drills so well, we could work the plotting boards and the map reading and the calculations and all the rest of it. And we got through our mission before the RAR. And they then came over and said, you territorials don't often get to shoot mortars and that. Would you like to finish our mission and on the new long-barreled South African mortar? Well, of course, to ducks quack, and the guys were really happy to do this. And we went over and finished the mission on the RAR mortars, which was a fantastic opportunity for us. Anyway, after the whole thing, we reported back, and the RAR went off. And at the end of the call-up, we returned to Bulawayo. And a few weeks later, the colonel called me in and said, "Hey, look at this communication from Army HQ." There was a commendation from the RAR colonel via HQ to say, "Well done, 2RR mortars. It's great to see territorials can do this, that, and the next thing." And the colonel was pretty chuffed that, 2RR had been recognized. And I appreciated that the RAR Sergeant Major went and about what had happened. And as a consequence, we got that report from HQ. And it wasn't long after that that Umtali got revved up from the Mozambique side. And they needed a mortar platoon pretty darn quick to join the armored cars and everything that were rushed to Umtali to counter this aggression from Frelimo. So we fetched up a 3 independent company at Adams Barracks, and we put in a mortar line in Adams Barracks. And on occasions, there were some infringements from Frelimo, which we responded to and what have you. And we alternated with 1RR. They came up at one stage, and they only brought their 60mm mortars because they'd never used the 81s, so which was pointless because you hadn't got the range and what have you. And then a reserve battalion came up, and we noticed that this reserve battalion had these brand new South African mortars, and we still had the old stuff. And we had a visit from Miss Rhodesia, who came up to the barracks with General Walls. And he came around and was talking to the guys, and he said, "Do you boys have any complaints?" And one of my sergeants, Joch Bronkhorst, he stepped forward and saluted and said to the general, "Yes, we've got a very serious complaint here, sir." And I thought, what on earth are you talking about, Bronkhorst? You're going to drop us right in it. And Wall said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "We are an active battalion. We've got these old-fashioned mortars. The reserve guys are coming in here with brand new kit. It's just unacceptable." Well, I could have shot the crowd. Anyway, Walls took a note, and within a week, we had been resupplied, re-equipped with brand new long barrel, and we were chuffed. We spent quite a lot of time in Matari, or Umtali, as I should say. We were seconded from 1 brigade to 3 brigade. And it was a wonderful situation because 2RR forgot about us because we'd been sent off to Umtali. 3 brigade, we weren't directly attached to 3 brigade. We were 1 brigade guys on loan, and they left us alone. And we organized our own call-ups, and it was wonderful. Eventually, 4RR, who were based in Matari, got their mortar platoon together and then replaced us, and we were sent back to Bulawayo. And we dreaded it because now we were back under 1 brigade, under 2RR, and we were going to have all the nonsense again. But blow me down on, as we got back, that extended call-up period in 76, where we were all called up virtually for the whole year, broke. And we were rushed down to Ritenga, where 2RR had set up its job. And we had no sooner got there than there was a problem at Villa Salazar. And the RAR mortar platoon was at Villa Salazar. And the Zulu Scouts were at Villa Salazar. And there was a fair deal of punch-up between the Rhodesians in Villa Salazar and the Mozambique Frelimo in Malvernia, named after Lord Malvern. So Malvernia was in Mozambique, where Frelimo were, and Villa Salazar was named after the former president of Portugal. And they swapped the names, in the days when we were still friendly with Mozambique when it was Portuguese occupied. Anyway, we got shipped down on a ghost train. It was quite a hoot. The Rhodesia to Malvernia Maputo railway line was no longer used, but they had to get my mortar platoon down there, and they had to get armored cars down there, and the roads were so bad and so waterlogged you couldn't drive down. They put us on a ghost train, and they ran this ghost train down to just before Mabalahuta, Mother Party area, where there was a siding, and we debussed and we drove in to Villa Salazar. And as we drove in, the Frelimo guys had been provoked by the Salute Scouts, I think, and there was a full-blown punch-up going on as we drove in. And as we arrived in Villa Salazar, Ed Murphy and what was the other guy's name? Eddie Murphy and his sidekick, the two American guys that were now in the Salute Scouts. And when we drove in, they told us to park our vehicles, get under our vehicles, and stay there, not to move. If any of us moved, the Salute Scouts promised to shoot us because we'd be getting in the way. And we sat there, and the artillery was going, and the RAR mortars and what have you. It was just absolute mayhem. And I went and spoke to, it was John Early and John Murphy. Those are the two guys. And I spoke to John Murphy, who was in charge. And I said, what's the objective here? And he said, well, we're getting pounded by these Frelimo guys, and we're retaliating. So I asked the RAR platoon commander, what's your objective? He says, they had us in shoot. So what they were doing, they were just plastering Malvernia without any specific target. It was like, buckshot. They were just shooting all over the place. And I asked Murphy, and I said, you must have some idea where Frelimo have their positions and where. And he could work out from the trajectile where these rockets were impacting into Villa Salazar. He could work out more or less where the Frelimo rocket launchers were. And so he gave us that reference, and we got hold of the RAR mortars, and we redirected them into where the Salute Scouts thought things were, and everything quietened down. And after a couple of days, the RAR mortar platoon went back. We had the artillery behind us, and we put in the 2RL mortar platoon at Villa Salazar, and we actually got seconded to the Salute Scouts for the operations in that area, and came under command of the Salute Scouts for 18 months at Villa Salazar, and assisted them with their external ops and what have you. And as a consequence of that 18 months there, and the time we spent under the control of the Salute Scouts, we had some memorable incidents and what have you. And that's how come I got the MFC. It was because of that period down there, working with the Salute Scouts for 18 months, where basically the Salute Scouts overran Malvernia with support from us and the artillery. They totally neutralized Malvernia. It was an incredible experience, and professional soldiers, like, you just couldn't believe how good these chaps were. We did one external op down the railway line. The various sidings were being used as staging points for tours coming up. We went in with our mortars strapped to scrambler motorbikes. We had mortars and ammunition on scrambler motorbikes, and we rode in and supported 2RL companies who did the first territorial external op in hammering all these sidings on the way down to Maputo, and came back. And after a period of time, Army decided that we had spent long enough down there and were getting rather blasé. So we got redeployed up to Vic Falls. Can you imagine, from Villa Salazar in the middle of nowhere to Vic Falls, and our duties were to protect the tourists in the booze cruise and what have you. And at that stage, we had the 106 recoilless rifle on the back of the 2.5, and then we had 81mm mortars also mounted on the back of these 2.5s. So we were very mobile. And along with the armored cars, we would protect the crews, the booze crews and what have you, and any infiltration that Zipra tried to do in Vic Falls. And one night, Zipra did try and cross the Zambezi. They were spotted by the armored cars who caught them in the middle of the river. The artillery and mortars engaged, and of course, with the mortar and the artillery exploding on the water surface, the shrapnel and what have you, and the whole thing was contained. And we were there in Vic Falls until the fateful election, and that dreadful period where Army HQ went quiet. We didn't know what was happening. We were promised on all things holy that Mugabe wouldn't win, but he did. And the whole thing just collapsed in a heap. It was dreadful. But after the period when they brought in all the terrorists all came into those camps and what have you, and we had the South African military hiding in parts of Rhodesia, and we had the British monitoring forces. We were required to go clandestine in to some of these camps where the terrorists were gathering, and we all got uniformed as BSAP, because the Rhodesian army wasn't allowed to be there, but the BSAP was allowed. And so we had all these British army units that were based at these different places. And Tuara Support Company went in with BSAP uniforms on, with 106mm recoilless rifles under canvas on the back of the 2.5, 81mm mortars under canvas on the back. And they'd also then issued us with 5.0 Browning water-cooled heavy machine guns, and we had those on the back of 2.5s as well. And this lot drove in, and we based up at these different places with the British forces. And then talking to them, they said, "Pitchford, are you trying to tell me that you're a policeman?" I said, "Yeah, can't you see? I've got a police uniform." And those weapons over there, well, you can't see those weapons, and they're all under camera. He says, "Look, I'm not daft. I know what's underneath there. And you telling me that the British South African Police Force in Rhodesia has got 106mm anti-tank guns, 5.0 Brownings, 81mm mortars. You guys pull the other leg. We know exactly who you are." Well, we stuck to our guns. And the whole idea was that if Mugabe won, the South Africans who were hiding and us, we were just going to go in and take out these camps and what have you, and to hell with the British forces that were there. But as you know, it never happened. The order never came forward. I believe the Commissioner of Police would not sanction it, and Jock, it had to be unanimous, and the whole thing collapsed, and that was the end of it. And we all, the war stopped. We all went back, but we carried on at Tuara. We used to go down and have our Thursday dinner at in the officers' mess, and a few drinks and what have you. We had a few interesting incidents. There was that time when Nkoma came in with these guys from down at West Neck, Philabuzi, and they tried to infiltrate Bulawayo with their armoured personnel carriers and got taken out by the armoured cars. But some of the amusing incidents was the regular officers' mess next door to the Tuara officers' mess was now populated by ex-terrorists, and they were now the new brigadier and the new colonels and all. And it was amazing. We sort of coexisted side by side in an amazing way, because prior to that, we would have shot each other if given half a chance. And one evening, we were in our mess, and there was a knock on the door. And here were the regular officers from next door knocking on and asking permission to come into our mess. Well, we were gobsmacked. And of course, we invited them in, and we were hospitable. And we asked, to what do we owe the pleasure of this company? And they said, well, the treasurer of the regular army officers' mess had nicked all the funds, and the mess was closed, and they had nowhere. So did they mind if they could come and have a drink in our place? It was just amusing. But the war stories, and some of those guys had been involved in incidents with Tuareg down in the Buffalo Range, Rutenga area. And, we were so daft. We used to drive around our trucks with the 1 Brigade badge and the 44 badge, and they knew that 44 was Tuareg. And now they were recounting contacts from their perspective, and with our colonel and certain incidents that these guys had been involved in, a lot, against us. Here we were in the Zimbabwean army now, sharing these war stories. It was quite the most bizarre situation. But then in 82, so independence was in 80. In 82, we decided to wrap up. The brigade wanted us to continue. They didn't want us to disband. But there was just absolutely no point. And so we disbanded, and that was it. And we fought a good fight, won all the battles, lost the war. The old story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, Roy, that's really interesting. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Mortar Platoon, 2RR Mortar Platoon, so it's interesting to me. You also said that you were involved in the battle of when Nkrumah tried to take over Bulawayo.
Yeah, we were called. There was that big punch up between Zipper and Zandler, and he had sent his guys in with those Russian armored personnel carriers, and the armored car guys near the Holiday Inn, they were embedded there anticipating something. And it was a dark, misty morning when these armored personnel carriers came through. And after the punch-up, we went out to recover them. And the accuracy of these armored car guys was just incredible. And at that stage, they were all mainly black national service guys that were now in the armored car regiment. And 2 of the armored personnel carriers had been hit. The centerpiece of the windscreen is where the round hit. And of course, in its armor-piercing implosion, it just ripped out the entire innards of that armored car, that armored personnel carrier. They took out 2. 2 got through. They turned their turrets around, and they hit 1 as it was driving away from them. And the spare wheel on the back of the armored personnel carrier, they hit bang in the middle and took out the 3rd one. The 4th one kept going, and it was accounted for by one of the staff called drivers who was in a 4.5, a Mercedes 4.5, coming up the road, and he saw this armored personnel carrier barreling down the Esegadini Road, and so he just swung his truck, his Mercedes 4.5, and hit the armored personnel carrier head on. And having stopped it, he then realized he had damaged this vehicle. He absconded because he didn't want to be charged for damaging the vehicle. And when we got there, this 4.5, we pulled the front bumper back, okay, it'd been bent under, pulled it back, and the truck was fine. and somebody drove it back to Brady Barracks. The Russian armored personnel carrier was completely stoved in. It was amazing. And it was totaled. And so all 4 of those things were accounted for.
Were those BTRs?
I think they were, yeah. I think they were. But after that, there was a lot of fighting in the high-density suburbs. And we were told to go in and separate Zipra from Zondler. And my guy said to me, hang on, what on earth are we doing this for? Yeah, we lost the war. Now these guys are punching each other's eyes out. Why should we get involved? And I said, those are the orders. And it was weird because we sat down with the brigade commander, who was an ex-Turk, and negotiated what we would do. We protect the hospitals, we do this and the next thing. And he asked us to go in and try and separate the 2 factions that were near the high-density suburbs. So we did. We went in, and we were lying doggo in a depression, and we saw these Zipra guys coming, and thought, there's a whole lot of them, and do we really want to get involved in this after all this time? But I had a Sergeant Major, Eddie van der Merwe. He went out in front of these guys and explained to them that they better put all their rifles down, because otherwise, and for reasons we never worked out, they actually agreed. They put their rifles down, and we all came out of the long grass, and an incident was averted. But there were a lot of badly wounded guys, and we found one chap had a chest wound. He'd been shot right through the chest, and somebody had taken all his clothes off, but he was just lying under the tree, almost breathing through this gunshot wound in his chest, but he was still alive. So we got him off to the hospital. Yet we found another guy who was in a hospital bed. He'd been shot through the ankle, and he had bled to death. It was weird. Anyway, all those hostilities came to an end. We went back to Brady Barracks. We handed in all our kit and equipment and vehicles, and that was it. It was the end of the road, and we all stood down. But it was quite a weird conclusion to one's military career. Fraternizing with the enemy, as it were.
Yeah. Gosh, Roy, thank you so much for your time and for your contribution. I'm glad we got your story on the record, and much appreciated.
Pleasure, John. Anytime.
Okay.
Enjoy the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yes.